Reducing body fat is a primary goal for most lifters. We know that it is possible to get extremely lean, as seen by physique competitors and some other athletes. However, these athletes usually just stay in this lean state for a temporary period of time to be the most competitive for a specific event or competition. In this video, we will explore what is the lowest body fat that we can realistically maintain long term. First, we need to look at what is the lowest body fat we can physiologically maintain and still survive. This comes down to what we call our essential body fat levels. Essential body fat is the amount of fat required to perform regular physiological functions necessary for survival and everyday function. Without some small amount of body fat, the human body can't function correctly. Essential body fat levels are different for males versus females. According to this sport nutrition textbook, essential body fat levels are approximated to be around 3% for males, while females have a higher essential body fat requirement of around 12%, which is believed to be a result of childbearing and hormonal functions. So what this tells us is that we cannot maintain a body fat below these essential levels. It is technically possible to maintain body fat just above these essential levels. However, this is just one piece of the puzzle. In reality, it is much more complicated than this, as we will cover throughout the rest of this video. So even if we technically can survive with only essential levels of body fat, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a healthy body fat to sustain. It is well established that being too lean can have many negative health outcomes, especially if sustained for an extended period of time. There are two potential causes of this. The first is due to what we call low energy availability. This refers not necessarily to our body fat level or body weight, but to the low calorie intake required to maintain such a low body fat. This research review explored the effects of low energy availability in athletes. It was found that low energy availability can result in a variety of negative health consequences, such as endocrine alterations, suppression of reproductive functions, mental disorders, thyroid suppression, and altered metabolic responses. And the other cause of this is simply due to being at a low body fat level. It is difficult to pinpoint the exact body fat level that negative health outcomes start to occur, and it is likely different for each individual. An example of how being too lean can negatively affect health can be seen in this case study of a bodybuilder going through contest preparation. As this athlete dieted down to around 5% body fat, many blood markers dropped outside of the healthy range. For example, this graph shows that testosterone dropped below the healthy range during the athlete's contest season. And this graph shows that white blood cell count dropped below a normal healthy range too, which is an indicator of immune function. And this is a similar trend for most other biomarkers measured in this study too. So even though it is technically possible to maintain a body fat a little over essential levels, this doesn't mean it is a healthy or sustainable place to live. In fact, it is pretty well established that being too lean will almost certainly have negative health consequences at some point. This can be a result of both low energy availability or from having too little body fat. Exactly how lean you need to get before health is affected is not entirely clear, and probably differs from person to person. Although as a general guide, most sources usually suggest that being leaner than around 10% for males or around 18% for females is where most people may start to see negative health outcomes. However, there are plenty of exceptions to this rule, where some people can be completely healthy below this range, and it is possible for others to see negative health consequences when dropping below a higher body fat threshold. Therefore, it is important to use your own biofeedback and health markers to assess where this point may lie. Beyond what we are physiologically able to survive with and what will promote good health, there are also many other factors which can influence what body fat we can maintain. The first mechanism which will influence our habitual leanness is what is known as the set point and settling point theories. According to this research review, the set point theory suggests that our inherent physiology wants us to be at a specific body fat. If our body fat increases above our set point, there are mechanisms which signal us to eat less and be more active to reduce body fat. And if we reduce body fat below this level, there are signals to gain body fat. This may come in the form of nutrition-related signals, such as an increased hunger and decreased satiety from food, and also in the form of movement signals, such as increased lethargy and decreased subconscious movements. And this is thought to be regulated purely from a physiological standpoint via the brain and hormones. This theory tends to make some sense. Our body is trying to keep us in a healthy physiological state by preventing us from being overweight or underweight, both of which can have negative health consequences. And not surprisingly, there are mechanisms in place that help our body regulate this healthy range. However, this theory doesn't fully explain what we see in the real world. If this theory held true in all cases, we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic in the modern world, because human physiology should keep us in a healthy range. This is where the settling point theory comes into play. The settling point theory suggests that environment and behaviours, such as how much exercise we perform and our eating behaviours, will determine our energy balance. And this will then determine what our body weight and body fat will be. So rather than the set point theory, which assumes there is one set healthy body fat value that we are destined to be, the settling point theory suggests that our body fat is largely a result of external factors. And this body fat can change over time based on our current habits and behaviours. Both of these theories are true to some extent. Our inherent physiology does have processes in place to regulate our body composition, but our environment, habits, and behaviours will also play a role too. How environment, behaviours, and habits impact body fat is a whole topic in itself that we cannot cover entirely in this video. But essentially, we just need to understand that our lifestyle can have a major impact on our body fat. To conceptualize this, we only need to look so far at obesity rates over time. According to the World Health Organization, obesity rates in Western English-speaking countries have approximately tripled from 1975 to 2016, such as in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. And this is a similar trend in most other countries around the world too. Although we cannot pinpoint the exact cause of these statistics, it seems intuitive that this is, at least in part, due to our lifestyles becoming more sedentary and high-calorie foods being more accessible. In other words, our modern lifestyles are promoting a higher calorie consumption and lower energy expenditure, which results in gains in body weight over time. In contrast, other lifestyles may promote a leaner physique. This study compared physical activity levels and body composition between a Western European and US population compared with a traditional hunter-gatherer population from Tanzania. As we can see, the hunter-gatherers had a higher average physical activity level and most likely a lower total calorie intake compared with the Western population. And as a result, the hunter-gatherers naturally maintained a lower body fat of around 21% for females and 13% for males, compared with the Western population who were around 38% for females and 22% for males. So as we can see, the inherent behaviours associated with our lifestyle can have a major influence on the body fat we naturally maintain. One reason our lifestyle influences our habitual body fat is a result of our physical activity levels. Physical activity can promote the maintenance of a leaner physique via multiple mechanisms. The obvious one is that exercise burns more calories each day, but it also has other benefits too. One benefit is that exercise can promote greater muscle mass, which is something we will touch on later in this video. Furthermore, exercise can help to regulate hunger and satiety so that we eat in accordance with our actual energy requirements rather than eating for emotional or behavioural reasons. This was established in this research review which assessed the effects of exercise on appetite control. The authors proposed this graph, suggesting that when exercise is very low, we fall into this non-regulated zone, where we tend to consume a high calorie intake despite having low energy expenditure. However, as we move towards moderate to high physical activity levels, we tend to eat in accordance with our actual energy demands. In other words, we eat based on how much energy we expend. The best way to quantify physical activity levels is via our total daily step count. As a general guide, a low activity level would be less than around 5,000 steps per day. A moderate activity level would be around 5 to 10,000 steps per day. A high activity level would be around 10 to 15,000, and a very high activity level would be more than 15,000. And not surprisingly, we find that populations with higher physical activity levels are usually able to maintain a lower body fat compared with low physical activity populations. For example, this study assessed physical activity levels and body composition of a traditional Amish community residing in North America. As we can see, the Amish men averaged around 16 to 20,000 steps per day, with the women averaging around 12 to 16,000 steps. As a result of their physically active lifestyles, in conjunction with their eating habits, men were on average around 9% body fat and women were around 25%. Although we didn't elaborate on the nutrition side of things, this is one example of many that show populations with high physical activity levels tend to be able to maintain a lower body fat than those with less active lifestyles. Therefore, how much exercise we do will likely influence the lowest body fat we can maintain over time. The next modifiable factor that can influence leanness is the entire topic of nutrition. This is probably the most impactful variable we have control over that will make the largest difference in what body fat we can maintain. Without going into too much detail, the primary factor at play here is total daily calorie intake. Simply put, to maintain a leaner physique, we need to eat fewer calories on average each day. However, as our body weight reduces, our maintenance calories also decrease. So to maintain this lower body weight, fewer calories need to be consumed just to be at maintenance. For example, let's say a male weighed 75 kilos with approximately 25% body fat. If they dieted down to 65 kilos, assuming they maintained all of their muscle mass, this would put them at around 13% body fat. Let's also assume physical activity levels are exactly the same at both points in time. For this person to maintain 75 kilos, let's say they need to consume 2,700 calories per day. However, at 65 kilos, their maintenance calories may have dropped to around 2,500 calories. This is a normal physiological response and will almost always occur with significant weight loss. So what this means is that trainees will need to habituate to a lower calorie intake to maintain a leaner physique. Lifters may find that they have a greater desire to eat with a lower calorie intake due to physiological hunger signals, environmental factors, or from adjusting to new habits. So basically, this reduction in calorie intake usually requires more structure, rigidity, and newly formed habits to be sustainable. And at some point, this can become unsustainable or not suitable for your lifestyle if taken too far. You may need to track your calories every day, meal prep for the entire week, eat unsatisfactory foods, avoid social events involving foods, and much more. Some of these strategies are just not suitable for many people and may not be worth maintaining excessive leanness for. But in most cases, being a little more structured and rigid with your diet and exercise is probably a safe and healthy endeavor. Another factor that can influence your lowest sustainable body fat is muscle mass. Having more muscle mass generally helps with the maintenance of a lower body fat. This is because we can achieve the same leanness at a higher body weight, compared with having less muscle mass. Obviously, having more muscle mass in itself is desirable for aesthetics, performance, and health, but it also means that our maintenance calorie intake will be greater. As we mentioned, weight loss generally results in a decrease in maintenance calories, assuming all other factors are equated. So by maintaining a higher body weight, we will likely be able to eat more calories at the same leanness. In fact, muscle mass seems to be the greatest predictor of total daily energy expenditure. This study looked at energy expenditure in a huge database of over 6,000 people, ranging from newborns to elderly adults. It was found that muscle mass seemed to be the best predictor of total daily energy expenditure across the entire population range. As we can see, there was an almost linear relationship between total daily energy expenditure and fat-free mass across the entire human population. However, from a physiological standpoint, this probably isn't going to impact hunger and satiety all that much. If you were eating a low relative calorie intake, this can't be avoided. However, this can have a positive effect on environmental and behavioral factors influencing calorie intake. If we have a higher maintenance calorie intake, we may be less susceptible to overeating. This is because your eating habits will be more aligned with what is considered normal among your social environment. Consuming a regular portion of food will be less of an issue with a higher calorie intake, even if there is no effect on your physiology. This can help with adherence to your required calorie intake, as there is less incentive to overeat due to social abnormality. And this leads us on to the next factor influencing the leanest body fat we can maintain, and this is our social life. While social activity is necessary for enjoyment and mental health, certain activities can promote a higher habitual body fat if conducted too frequently. Many social activities involve food and drink, which can increase your calorie intake. This is often consumed despite not even being physiologically hungry, rather we eat as a mechanism to gather and engage in a mutual activity. Now, this is not inherently a bad thing to do. We should just be aware that some people are naturally more or less social than others, and may engage in different social activities too. Some may overeat and consume excessive calories via alcohol multiple times per week as a result of social activity, while others may play recreational sport as their primary social activity. So quite clearly, one of these is going to make it easier to maintain a lower body fat, while the other will make it more difficult. Ultimately, we should just understand that our social life can make it more or less difficult to maintain a lower body fat. While all of these factors have an impact on body fat, we should also be aware that there can be substantial variation between individuals. Even with training, nutrition, physical activity, environment, and habits equated, two different people may have different limits as to how lean they can maintain. There are people who have no issue staying below 10% body fat as a male or below 18% as a female, and others may struggle to maintain below 20% as a male or 28% as a female. This may simply be due to our genetic makeup, but it will also be influenced by other environmental factors as we have discussed. Like all other physiological traits, there is a bell curve shaped relationship among the population. Most people have a similar physiological response, but there are outliers on either end of the spectrum. So the take-home message here is that you should find the lowest body fat that you can maintain, and don't get too caught up in how this compares to others. And the last factor to discuss on this topic is that maintaining your lowest body fat may not be the most productive for your long-term goals. More specifically, this is probably not the ideal way to build muscle mass over time. Most people watching this video probably have an interest in building muscle over time to some extent. It is possible to build muscle while staying quite lean, although it is probably not the most productive way to do so. We see this in practice with competitive physique athletes. They gain significant body weight after a competition, they don't just try to stay at their leanest sustainable body fat. This is to maximize their rate of muscle growth in the off-season, because it is simply more productive to do so at a higher body fat. And there is no right or wrong way to go about this. Some people preference leanness over muscle mass, while others preference muscle mass over leanness. Just be aware that there may be a trade-off between chasing constant leanness and muscle growth. Maintaining a leaner physique will probably result in a slower rate of muscle growth over time, while intentionally gaining weight or maintaining a higher body fat will probably result in a faster rate of growth over time. Taking all of this information into consideration, let's establish some practical recommendations. First of all, there are physiological barriers which may limit our level of leanness that we can maintain. We require a small amount of body fat for survival, known as our essential body fat. This is estimated to be around 3% for males and around 12% for females. Furthermore, being too lean can also have negative health consequences. So from a physiological perspective, being chronically less than around 10% for males or around 18% for females can potentially result in diminished health outcomes, although these values can be highly variable between people. So even if we can maintain this level of leanness from a physiological standpoint, it doesn't mean that this will be feasible in reality. This is because there are many other factors which will influence our calorie intake and energy expenditure. This includes our physical activity levels, nutrition practices, the amount of muscle we are carrying, habits and environment, and our social life. These factors will ultimately determine what level of leanness each individual can maintain. As a very general guideline for most people, it is probably feasible and healthy to maintain a body fat somewhere between around 10 to 20% for males and around 18 to 28% for females. But we should also be aware that there are certainly people who may fall outside of this general range due to individual physiological or habitual factors. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.